At our old school's 50-year reunion inside a luxury country club, my ex-wife stood beside her new husband as he raised his glass and laughed. Some men build success. Others spend their lives fixing wires. Everyone laughed at me, the old electrician in the worn suit. Behind him hung a giant photo of the gym his company had renovated years ago. What no one knew was that he had installed cheap electrical equipment, pocketed nearly $1 million, and almost killed a 17-year-old boy. I saved that boy's life, and tonight I brought the original invoices. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to wait years for justice, yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Some details have been fictionalized for storytelling. What matters most is the message about patience, justice, and dignity. The letter from my lawyer arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before the reunion, with a single number that changed everything: 47 days. I sat at my kitchen table in Richardson, Texas, and read the paragraph twice. Statute of limitations for contract fraud in Texas, 10 years from discovery of the offense. I discovered Walter Platt's theft in June 2012. Today was November 16, 2021. The legal window would close in 47 days, January 2, 2022. The reunion was scheduled for December 7th, 21 days from now. I set the letter down next to my coffee mug and looked out the window at my Ford in the driveway. 15 years old, primer gray, where the paint had worn through. Walter Platt drove a Mercedes these days. I'd seen him around town, always waving from behind tinted windows, always smiling like a man who'd gotten away with something. He had gotten away with something for 10 years. But 47 days meant I still had time. And 21 days meant Walter had already accepted my invitation without knowing what he'd walked into. I drank my coffee slowly. It had gone cold while I read the letter, but I finished it anyway. Waste bothered me more than bad coffee. 20 years as Chief Electrical Maintenance Officer for the Richardson School District taught me that nothing wasted, everything accounted for, every connection tested twice. That's how I'd built the case against Walter. 10 years of collecting every scrap of evidence, every invoice he'd forged, every contract he'd falsified. $847,000 in fraudulent electrical contracts. Money that should have gone to safety upgrades for schools. Money that went into Walter's real estate developments instead. Money he stole while I took the fall for an accident that nearly killed a child. I stood up from the table, my knees protesting the way they did every morning now that I was 68. My hands still worked fine, though calloused and steady from 40 years working with high-voltage systems. The hands that had pulled a 17-year-old boy out of an electrified maintenance panel in 2012, while Walter Platt stood 20 feet away, watching, doing nothing. The newspaper was waiting on the front porch. I opened the door and found Floyd Brennan standing 3 houses down, walking his terrier. He was 72, a retired postal worker who'd lived on this street longer than I had, and he had the well-meaning pity of a man who thought he understood my life. Harvey Floyd called out, changing direction toward my driveway. "Morning, Floyd." He stopped at the edge of my lawn, the terrier sniffing at my mailbox post. "Saw the reunion invitation in your mail last month. You really going? Planning on it?" Floyd shook his head. "I don't know, Harvey. Walter Platt's being honored as Hawthorne High's biggest sponsor. Got his name on the new library and everything. Might be hard being there when everyone's celebrating him. Maybe I want to see how things have changed." "Some things don't change," Floyd said, and there was that pity again. Money still talks. Always has. I picked up the newspaper from the porch. "I'm just visiting old friends, Floyd. It's been a long time. What does a man do when he has 47 days to correct 10 years of lies?" Floyd studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, you know yourself best. Just seems like opening old wounds is all I'm saying. Appreciate the concern. He nodded, tugged the terrier's leash, and continued his walk. I watched him go, thinking about all the people who'd watched me over the years with that same expression. The man who'd lost everything. The man who'd been blamed for nearly killing a teenager. The man whose my first wife, Emily, died of a heart attack 3 days after Nola served me divorce papers, 3 days after the incident that destroyed everything. They didn't know I'd spent those 10 years doing something other than grieving. I walked down the driveway to my Ford keys in my pocket, though I wasn't planning to drive anywhere. The morning air was cool enough to see my breath. Down the street, a lawnmower started up, even though it was November, and the grass had stopped growing weeks ago. I opened the trunk. The brown leather briefcase sat exactly where I'd placed it 6 months ago, when the last piece of evidence finally came together. I didn't open it. I'd opened it 1,000 times over the past decade, adding documents, checking dates, cross-referencing invoices against bank records. I knew every page by heart. Contracts with forged signatures. Invoices from Walter's shell company billing the school district for work never done. Photographs of the electrical panel that nearly killed Ethan Whitfield, showing the corners Walter had cut to maximize profit. Medical records from the hospital where I'd spent 2 weeks with burns on my hands from pulling Ethan free. And the centerpiece emails between Walter and his wife Nola discussing how to shift blame onto me. 10 years is a long time to carry silence. But silence, I'd learned, is just patience wearing a different name. I closed the trunk gently, the way I closed every door, deliberately, with certainty, no wasted motion. The reunion was 3 weeks away. 47 days until the statute ran out. I'd spent 10 years building this case in silence, documenting every lie Walter Platt had told, every dollar he'd stolen, every life he'd risked for profit. 3 more weeks was nothing. I walked back inside, leaving the Ford and its cargo waiting in the driveway. The briefcase would stay there until December 7th, until the moment I walked into Hawthorne Country Club and reminded Walter Platt that some debts don't expire just because time passes. Inside, my phone was ringing. Seattle area code. Farah calling right on schedule. My daughter knew this plan better than anyone. It was time to confirm the final details. I answered on the 3rd ring. Dad. Farah. My daughter's voice came through clear despite the 2,000 miles between Richardson and Seattle. Farah Fox was 32 years old, a senior software engineer at a tech firm that paid her more in a year than I'd made in 5 as chief electrical maintenance officer. She had her mother's sharp mind and my patience, a combination that made her the perfect ally in what we'd been planning for the past 2 years. Just got off a call with the airline, she said. Flight gets in December 5th, 2 days before the reunion. I'll rent a car and meet you at the house. Good. Dad. Her voice shifted, became quieter. Are you sure about this? Once we're there, once you start, no one can stop it. I looked out the window at my Ford in the driveway, at the trunk that held 10 years of evidence. I'm sure. I've been sure for 10 years. I know. She paused, and I heard the sound of traffic in the background. She was probably walking between buildings on her lunch break, finding a quiet spot to have this conversation. Mom wouldn't have wanted you to spend a decade on this. Your mother died because of what Walter and Nola did. The heart attack came 3 days after the divorce papers, 3 days after the incident destroyed everything we'd built. You think that was coincidence? No. Farah's voice was firm now. I don't. That's why I'm coming. That's why I've been helping you since I found those files in your garage 2 years ago. I remembered that day. Farah visiting from Seattle, helping me organize old boxes, finding the briefcase I'd thought I'd hidden well enough. She'd opened it, read the first 3 documents, looked at me with tears in her eyes, and said 5 words. Tell me what you need. What I'd needed was someone who understood technology, who could track digital footprints, who could help me build a case that would stand up in court and in the court of public opinion. Farah had spent 2 years quietly gathering evidence I couldn't access on my own emails, financial records, digital trails that connected Walter's shell company to the fraudulent contracts. Ethan knows the time and place, Farah said. He's ready when you are. That stopped me. You talked to Ethan last week. He called me, actually. Said he's been trying to reach you for years, but you never answered. He wants to testify, Dad. He wants people to know what really happened that day. Ethan Whitfield. 17 years old when I'd pulled him out of that electrical panel, 27 now. A cardiologist, last I'd heard. The boy who should have died because Walter cut corners to save money on safety equipment, because the cheap wiring failed at the worst possible moment, because profit mattered more than a teenager's life. I'd saved Ethan's life and spent 2 weeks in the hospital with burns on my hands and arms. Walter had blamed me for the faulty equipment, convinced the school board I'd been negligent, destroyed my reputation while covering up his own fraud. And Nola had stood beside Walter, not beside me. My wife of 36 years had chosen the man she'd been having an affair with over the husband who'd nearly died saving a child. Tell Ethan I'll see him at the reunion, I said. I will. Farah was quiet for a moment. I love you, Dad. Mom would be proud of what you're doing. I know she would. I love you too. See you December 5th. I hung up and set the phone on the kitchen table. My daughter had her mother's intelligence, and my patience, a dangerous combination for anyone who'd wronged us. That evening, after the sun had set and the neighborhood had gone quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the reunion invitation Nola had sent 3 weeks earlier. It had arrived in a cream-colored envelope, my name and address written in her elegant handwriting, the same handwriting I'd seen on love notes 30 years ago, on grocery lists and birthday cards, and eventually on divorce papers. The invitation itself was professionally printed on heavy cardstock Hawthorne High School class of 1971 50th reunion. December 7th, 2021, 7 o'clock, Hawthorne Country Club. Below that, in smaller text, honoring our distinguished alumni and their contributions to the community. Walter would be honored, of course. His name was on the new library, on the STEM classroom, on a scholarship fund he'd supposedly funded with his own money. The whole town thought Walter Platt was a philanthropist who'd made his fortune in real estate and given back to his community. The whole town was wrong. I ran my finger across the embossed lettering, thinking about the phone call Farah had relayed to me 3 weeks ago. Nola had called her, they still talked occasionally, though Farah kept the conversations brief and surface level. Nola had said she hoped I would attend the reunion, that it would be good for me to see how well everyone was doing, how much the school had grown, how generous the community's supporters had been. Farah had recognized the subtext immediately. Nola wanted me there to watch Walter receive honors, to see the comparison between the successful real estate developer and the disgraced former maintenance officer, to understand that she'd made the right choice when she left me for him. She thought the invitation was her idea, her choice, her power move. She was wrong. How long does it take for a trap to close? 10 years if you're patient. 3 weeks if you're ready. I'd been waiting for this invitation for a decade, waiting for Nola to feel secure enough in her victory to invite me back into their world, to put me on display as proof of how far they'd risen and how far I'd fallen. I'd known she would do it eventually. Pride always overrides caution given enough time. And now I had exactly what I needed. The stage, the audience, the moment when Walter would be most vulnerable because he'd be most confident. I placed the invitation on the table under the yellow kitchen light and read Nola's handwritten note at the bottom one more time. Harvey, I hope you'll join us. It would mean a lot to see you there. She thought this was her invitation. She thought she was controlling who stood where, who mattered, who didn't. She had no idea I'd been waiting 10 years for her to ask me back into Walter Platt's world. Not to watch him win, to watch him fall, but to understand how Walter would fall. You need to understand what I was before he took it all away. 12 years ago, I knew every inch of Hawthorne High School, the way a man knows the rooms of his own home, every circuit, every switch, every place where the building breathed and hummed with electricity. I was 56 years old, Chief Electrical Maintenance Officer for the Richardson Independent School District, 11 years in that position. The school was 180,000 square feet of classrooms, offices, gymnasiums, and laboratories, and I could walk it blindfolded and tell you which panel controlled which wing, which breaker ran hot, which transformer needed replacing. I arrived at 6 every morning, an hour before the first teacher. I'd walk the building with my toolbox and clipboard, checking systems, testing emergency lights, making sure everything worked right. In those 11 years as chief, I had maintained a perfect safety record. Not one electrical fire, not one serious shock, not one system failure that endangered anyone. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I did it right. Mr. Fox, can you check the projector in room 214? It keeps flickering. That was Ms. Carson, the chemistry teacher, stopping me in the hallway one Tuesday morning in the fall of 2010. Already fixed it, I told her. Loose ground wire. Saw it on yesterday's maintenance log. She blinked. When did you fix it? This morning, 6:15. Thank you. You're always 3 steps ahead. I was. That was the job. Stay ahead of problems, fix things before they became emergencies. It wasn't complicated work, but it mattered. I knew that building better than the principal knew his own office. That wasn't arrogance. It was just true. What I didn't know yet was that knowing electrical systems doesn't prepare you for understanding when your marriage starts to corrode from the inside. I had been a widower for 6 years by then. My first wife, Emily, passed in 2004, a quiet woman who taught 2nd grade and believed in education the way some people believe in prayer. Nola came into my life 2 years later, and for a time I thought I'd been lucky twice. Nola Fox worked in Hawthorne's front office as an administrative assistant. She was 51 in 2010, polished and articulate, the kind of woman who could make wealthy parents feel heard and important without ever appearing servile. She'd worked there 8 years, handling donor relations, parent communications, event coordination. She was good at her job the same way I was good at mine, competent, reliable professional. We'd been married 34 years. We'd raised Farah together, survived the usual struggles of money and mortgages and teenage rebellion. We weren't passionate anymore, not the way we'd been at 22, but we were solid. I thought we were happy. I should have paid more attention to the way Nola's voice changed during parent-teacher conferences. I'd walk past the administrative conference room sometimes and see her through the glass, sitting across from parents who drove Mercedes and wore expensive watches. Her posture would be different, with them straighter, more formal. Her smile wider. Her laugh lighter, more musical, as if she'd learned to modulate it for an audience that expected refinement. "We're so grateful for your foundation's support," she'd say to Theodore Hastings, the commercial real estate developer in his early 60s, who sat on Hawthorne's donor advisory board and wrote checks large enough that administrators remembered his name. "The facilities here are managed quite professionally, I assure you." She'd tell parents using words like quite and assure that never appeared in our dinner conversations. I noticed these things, but I told myself it was just professionalism. Different contexts require different tones. That was normal. When does a man become invisible in his own marriage? Not all at once. One introduction at a time. The moment I should have understood came on a Thursday afternoon in October 2010. I was walking past the conference room carrying a replacement ballast when I saw Nola inside with Theodore Hastings. They were reviewing blueprints for some proposed expansion, Nola taking notes while Hastings gestured at the drawings. I waved through the window. Just a small wave, the kind you make to your wife when you pass during work hours. Nothing demanding, just acknowledgement. Nola saw me. Our eyes met for half a second. She smiled briefly, a tight professional smile, and turned back to Hastings without pause, without introduction, as if I were a custodian passing in the hallway, instead of the man she'd slept beside for 3 decades. I kept walking, delivered the ballast, fixed the lights, went home at 4 like always. That evening, washing dishes after dinner, I mentioned it casually. "Saw you with the Hastings guy this afternoon. Major donor, right?" "Yes." Nola handed me a plate to dry. "He was reviewing plans for the new athletics complex." Looked like an intense conversation. It was. He's very particular about specifications. I waved. "Don't know if you saw me." Nola paused, her hands in the soapy water. "Oh, yes. He was in the middle of explaining something." I didn't want to interrupt. "Right," I said. "Important conversation." It was. I dried the plate slowly, carefully. Could have introduced me. Chief electrical officer. Might have had thoughts about wiring specifications. Nola pulled the plug in the sink. The water drained with a sucking sound. "He was in a hurry, Harvey. Important call." "Right, important call." She knew I didn't believe her. I knew she knew. The wound wasn't that she didn't love me. It was that she loved me quietly in private where money couldn't see. Nola never said outright that she was ashamed of me. She never had to. She just stopped introducing me as her husband when she stood next to people who mattered to her, people with money, people with influence, people who could give her the life she'd started wanting somewhere along the way. I saw it happening. And for 2 more years, I said nothing, told myself it didn't matter. Convinced myself that marriage was about the private moments, not the public ones. I was wrong about that. Marriage is about both. And when your wife starts editing you out of half her life, the other half doesn't last long. But saying nothing doesn't mean I didn't notice when Walter Platt walked into her world a year later, at a school fundraiser, shaking her hand with a grip that lasted 3 seconds too long, and a smile I recognized immediately as hunger dressed up as charm. The first time I saw Walter Platt, he was walking across Hawthorne's fundraiser hall in a suit that cost more than I made in 2 months, heading straight toward my wife. It was spring 2011, the annual donor appreciation event that Nola had organized for 3 years. The school's multi-purpose hall had been transformed with yellow string lights and white tablecloths, cocktail tables positioned around the room where 200 donors in expensive clothes discussed tax-deductible contributions. I stood near the refreshment table in my best suit, which was also my only suit, 15 years old, and showing its age nursing a ginger ale and watching Nola work the room. She was in her element. Navy dress I'd never seen before, hair styled in a way that required a salon visit. She moved from group to group with practiced grace, laughing at donors' jokes, making each person feel like their contribution mattered personally. I was there because spouses were expected to attend. I was there because after 35 years of marriage, you show up. Walter Platt arrived at 7:45, fashionably late, making an entrance. He was 55 years old in 2011, a real estate developer who'd made a fortune building strip malls and office parks across North Texas. He walked into that fundraiser hall like a man who'd bought buildings in every major city in the state and knew exactly what everything and everyone was worth. I stood near the punch bowl and watched money walk through the door. Walter didn't just enter a room. He owned it before he crossed the threshold. 6 feet tall, silver hair, swept back Italian suit that probably cost $3,000, shoes polished enough to catch the string lights. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. I watched him scan the crowd like a man evaluating real estate, measuring value, calculating potential. Then his eyes found Nola. She was at the donor reception table near the entrance, greeting major contributors. Walter walked directly to her, bypassing 3 other people who tried to intercept him. He had a target. Everything else was obstacle. "You must be the reason this event runs so smoothly." he said, extending his hand. His voice was smooth, practiced. I've heard so much about Hawthorne's exceptional staff. Nola laughed. Not her normal laugh, the one I heard over breakfast. This was different. Lighter. Musical. The laugh she saved for people she wanted to impress. Oh, we have a wonderful team, she said, taking his hand. But thank you, that's very kind. Their hands stayed together. I was 30 feet away, watching. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. 4. When they finally released, Nola touched her hair, a gesture I recognized, one she only made when she was interested in someone, when she wanted to appear younger, more attractive, more available than she was. I'd seen that gesture directed at me once, 36 years ago, at a church social when we were both 21. Watching your wife fall for another man is like watching someone walk toward a cliff in slow motion. You see it happening, you know what's coming, and there's a moment when you have to decide whether to shout or stay silent and remember everything. I chose silence and memory. Walter leaned closer to Nola, said something I couldn't hear. She laughed again, that new laugh, and her shoulders shifted, angling toward him, closing the space. Her entire posture changed. The professional administrator disappeared. Someone else emerged. I set down my ginger ale and walked over. Walter Platt, I said, extending my hand. Harvey Fox. I've seen your company's name on some of the construction contracts around the district. Walter turned toward me with the mild annoyance of someone interrupted. His eyes flicked to my name tag, the cheap adhesive kind they gave non-donor attendees, Harvey Fox, Chief Electrical Maintenance. He extended 2 fingers. Not a handshake. A gesture of minimal acknowledgement, the kind you give service staff when you're being polite, but don't want full contact. The maintenance man, he said. His tone was pleasant. His eyes were not. Pleasure. His eyes moved back to Nola before our hands separated. This is Harvey, Nola said. Not my husband, Harvey. Not Harvey Fox, who maintains every electrical system in this building. Not the man I've been married to for 35 years. Just Harvey. A name without context. A person without significance. Walter is on the advisory board for the new science wing renovation. Nola continued, her voice still in that lighter register. His company has done remarkable work on several educational facilities. I'm sure, I said. Walter nodded, once brief acknowledgement that I'd spoken, and turned back to Nola. As I was saying, the key to successful facility development is understanding the community's long-term vision. I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you see Hawthorne in 10 years. He said this while I was still standing there, 3 feet away, physically present but functionally dismissed. I've been looked through before, we all have. But that night I learned the difference between being invisible and being dismissed. Invisible means they don't see you. Dismissed means they see you and decide you don't matter. I stepped back. I'll let you two talk. Nice meeting you, Walter. Walter didn't respond. He was already deep in conversation with Nola about vision statements and community partnerships and strategic philanthropy. I walked back to the refreshment table, picked up my ginger ale, watched them talk for another 40 minutes while Nola's laugh got lighter and Walter's smile got wider, and I stood there in my 15-year-old suit, memorizing everything. The Italian suit, the polished shoes, the practiced charm, the way he touched Nola's elbow when he made a point, the way she leaned in when he spoke, the 2-finger handshake he'd given me, casual contempt disguised as courtesy. That man looked at me like I was an object, a fixture, something that came with the building. He shook my hand with 2 fingers like I might leave grease on his palm. He didn't know that while he was measuring Nola's interest, I was measuring him. Every word, every gesture, every detail of the suit, the watch, the practiced smile. I drove home that night thinking that man looked at me like I was nothing. But he didn't know I looked back and memorized everything. I spent the next year watching, observing, memorizing. Then winter came and everything ended in one night. I drove home with the medal in my pocket and pride in my chest, thinking my wife would finally see me the way the mayor had when he shook my hand with both of his and called me a hero. Winter 2012. 3 days after I'd pulled 17-year-old Ethan Whitfield out of an electrified maintenance panel during a basketball game at Hawthorne High. 3 days after 2 weeks in the hospital with second-degree burns on my hands and arms. The mayor had just given me a civilian heroism medal at City Hall. 200 people applauded. For the first time in 36 years of marriage, I thought Nola will be proud. I rehearsed it during the drive home. The mayor's speech, the certificate with my name in calligraphy, the fire chief's salute. Small details Nola could share with her friends, moments that might make her voice change when she talked about me. I pulled into our driveway at 9:47 and saw Walter Platt's black Mercedes parked on the street. Everything stopped. The pride, the rehearsed story, the 36 years of believing I understood my own life. I sat in my Ford with the medal in my pocket and looked at that Mercedes, and I knew that whatever I'd just won, I'd already lost something bigger. I walked to my own front door, put my key in my own lock, opened the door to my own home. Nola and Walter Platt sat at my kitchen table. Divorce papers spread between them, 2 coffee cups like they'd been there a while. Waiting. Nola looked up. No surprise, no guilt, just calm. "Hi, Harvey," she said. "Good. You're home. We need to talk." I stood in the doorway holding my keys. The medal felt heavy in my coat pocket. "I waited until tonight because I didn't want a scene," Nola said. Her voice was steady, practiced. "Sign the papers, Harvey. I've already signed. My lawyer reviewed everything. You keep the house, I keep my retirement account, we split the savings. It's fair." "I just received a medal," I said. The words came out quiet, factual. "For saving a 17-year-old boy's life." Walter stood up, put his hand on Nola's shoulder. The gesture was territorial, possessive. "And that's very noble, Harvey, truly. But nobility doesn't pay mortgages." I looked at Nola, at the woman I'd married 36 years ago. The woman who'd held my hand in the hospital when Farah was born. The woman who'd kissed me goodbye every morning for 3 decades. "Ma, you saved a child," Nola said. Her tone wasn't cruel. That was worse. It was matter-of-fact, reasonable. "That's admirable, Harvey. It really is. You're still just a poor electrician." She'd already signed the papers, before I walked in, before I even knew we were done. Her signature was there, black ink, final. "Nola's been living in a holding pattern for years," Walter said. He stood behind her, one hand still on her shoulder. "She deserves better than waiting for you to retire on a pension that won't cover property taxes in a decent neighborhood." "I saved a child's life 3 days ago," I said again. I didn't know what else to say. Walter smiled. "Not cruel, sympathetic. Worse than cruel." "I know. The whole district knows. You're a hero, Harvey. Heroes make headlines. Developers make money. Nola's choosing money." He said it like he was doing me a favor. I heard movement on the stairs, looked up. Farah stood there. Farah Fox was 20 years old in winter 2012, home from college for winter break, and she stood on the staircase of her childhood home watching her mother betray her father on the same night he'd been called a hero. She wore sweatpants and a university t-shirt, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked young and heartbroken and furious all at once. Nola saw her, softened her voice. "Sweetheart, you don't have to stay here. Walter has a beautiful home in Highland Park. Your own room. Anything you want. Better than this." Farah looked at her mother, then at Walter, then at me standing in the doorway with a medal in my pocket. "I'm staying with the parent who stayed," Farah said. Her voice was quiet but absolute. 20 years old, and already she understood something it had taken me 36 years to learn. Nola stood up. Farah, hi. You left on the night Dad got a medal for saving someone's life. Farah's voice cracked but didn't break. You planned it. I heard you on the phone yesterday checking what time the ceremony ended. You timed this. Nola looked away. That told me everything. Walter picked up his coat. We should go. Let everyone process. They left. Nola took one suitcase. She'd already moved most of her things out over the past week. While I was in the hospital, I realized. The house had been emptier, and I'd been too medicated to notice. After the door closed, Farah came down the stairs. We stood in the kitchen together. I took the medal out of my pocket and placed it on the table next to the divorce papers. 2 documents, side by side. One said I'd saved a life. The other said mine wasn't worth saving. I'm sorry you had to see that, I said. Farah looked at me. I'm not. Now I know who they are. She went upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table alone, looking at those 2 pieces of paper under the fluorescent light. A medal and divorce papers, side by side on a kitchen table. One said I'd saved a life. The other said mine wasn't worth saving. That's when it started. Not the planning yet. Not the evidence gathering. Just the understanding that this child, my daughter, had just watched her mother choose money over character status, over integrity, Walter Platt, over the man who'd raised her. Farah stood on the stairs looking at me, her mother's suitcase still audible being loaded into Walter's Mercedes outside. She was 20 years old, and she'd just watched her mother choose money over character. I thought this child is learning a lesson about what the world values, and I thought I have time. 10 years, if I'm patient. 10 years to show her that lesson has a different ending. But before I could plan the ending, I had to survive the beginning. And the beginning was a Friday night basketball game 3 days before everything changed. 3 days before Nola handed me divorce papers, I saved a 17-year-old boy's life in a gymnasium filled with 600 people who would later call me a hero. But in that moment, I was just a man who knew where the circuit breaker was. Friday night winter 2012. Hawthorne High School gymnasium packed with 600 spectators for the varsity basketball game. I was in the basement maintenance room doing a routine electrical check during halftime, listening to the crowd noise filter through the floor above me. Everything was running hot. Too hot. The gymnasium was pulling maximum load on circuits that had been upgraded 2 years earlier by Walter Platt's subcontractor. New panels, new wiring, new grounding system, all part of the athletic facility renovation that Platt Development had won through competitive bid. The same renovation that had come in under budget and ahead of schedule. I'd told the athletic director last month we needed a load assessment. The panels were running warmer than spec. He'd said he'd put it in next quarter's budget. Next quarter was 3 months away. I heard the crowd noise change above me, halftime ending, second half starting. 600 people. Every light at full brightness. The scoreboard. The sound system. The heating running at capacity because it was 32 degrees outside. I checked the panel temperature with my infrared thermometer. 10 degrees over normal operating range. Still within tolerance, but barely. I made a note to follow up Monday morning. Then I heard the crowd noise change again. Not cheering, screaming. I ran. The smell hit me when I burst through the gymnasium door, ozone-burning insulation smoke. The main electrical panel had overloaded. The metal safety fence along the court's sideline installed during the Platt renovation was energized live with current from a fault in the grounding system. Ethan Whitfield, 17 years old, Hawthorne's varsity forward with a basketball scholarship to Texas. A&M, already signed, had run toward an out-of-bounds ball, stumbled, fallen against the fence. Sparks erupted where his shoulder made contact. His body convulsed. He collapsed, but the current held him there, muscles locked. More sparks. Smoke rising from the wall mount. The referee's whistle shrieked, once, then stopped. Sterling Wade, 52 years old and Hawthorne's head basketball coach for 16 years, ran forward, stopped 8 feet away, seeing the sparks, froze. He'd seen broken ankles and concussions, but he'd never seen a boy dying from electrocution 8 feet away while he stood frozen, unable to help. "Don't touch him," Wade screamed. "Don't touch the fence." Someone cut the power. 600 people backed toward the exits. Emergency lighting kicked on. Parents screaming, players backing away. Someone pulled a fire alarm. 30 seconds. That's how long a human heart can survive without proper rhythm before permanent damage begins. I counted 8, 9, 10. I saw it all in 3 seconds. The boy convulsing against the fence. The coach paralyzed. The crowd screaming. The main circuit breaker on the far wall 8 meters away from where Ethan was dying. 8 meters, 30 seconds. The math was simple. The breaker was still energized. The fault was active. Touching it while current was flowing meant I'd get shocked too. But the boy had maybe 20 seconds left before cardiac arrest. I ran, not away, toward. My boots hit the polished gymnasium floor. People were screaming at me to stop, to wait for the fire department, to not touch anything. Sterling Wade yelled something I didn't hear. I reached the breaker panel on the west wall, ripped open the access door. The main disconnect switch was throwing sparks where the fault current was trying to find ground through the panel housing. I grabbed it anyway, with my bare left hand. Electricity coursed through my arm like being punched by lightning. The current found every nerve ending from my fingertips to my shoulder, burning, searing, locking my muscles the same way it had locked Ethan's. My palm blistered instantly against the metal switch. The smell of burning skin, my skin mixed with the ozone and smoke. I pulled the switch down with full force. The gymnasium went dark. Emergency lights only. The current stopped. My hand released the switch I hadn't been able to let go on my own. The electricity had held me there until I cut the power. I looked at my left palm. 2nd-degree burns. Skin blistering across the palm and 3 fingers, already turning white and red in patches. I ran to Ethan, pulled him away from the fence. His eyes were closed. His chest wasn't moving. I checked for a pulse. Found one. Weak but there. Put my ear to his chest. Heard breathing. Shallow, irregular, but present. Sterling Wade dropped to his knees beside me. "You just ran straight at it," he said. His voice was shaking. "Everyone else ran away. You ran toward it." Paramedics arrived. They took over oxygen mask on Ethan's face, checking vitals, preparing the stretcher. One of them looked at my hand. "Sir, you need treatment. That's a serious burn." "The boy first," I said. "Pain is temporary. A 17-year-old boy with his whole life ahead of him, that's permanent." The choice wasn't complicated. They loaded Ethan onto the stretcher. His eyes opened. He looked at me confused, in shock, but alive. His chest was rising and falling. His heart was beating. I pulled the boy out. My left hand was burned 2nd degree, the paramedics confirmed later, palm, and 3 fingers, skin blistering. But Ethan Whitfield was breathing. His chest was rising and falling. His eyes were open. And in 3 days, I would stand in City Hall holding a medal in that burned hand, while my wife handed me divorce papers with the other. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known, standing there in that dark gymnasium with my hand smoking and 600 people staring at me, was that this 17-year-old boy and his grateful parents would become the foundation of a 10-year plan to destroy the man who'd cut corners on the wiring that nearly killed their son. The foundation started in a hospital hallway 3 hours later with 2 parents who didn't know me, and a business card I almost didn't take. The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and fear, and my left hand felt like I'd held it over a stove for 30 seconds, which, chemically speaking, was exactly what I'd done. 11:20 at night. Dallas Memorial Hospital. I sat on a plastic chair outside the emergency room with my left hand wrapped in white gauze and burn gel, second-degree burns across the palm and 3 fingers. The paramedics had brought Ethan and me in the same ambulance 3 hours ago. Ethan was stable, being monitored for cardiac irregularities. The doctor said he'd make a full recovery. The nurse had offered me something stronger than ibuprofen twice. I'd refused both times. Wanted to stay clear-headed. Wanted to think. My hand throbbed. Each pulse reminded me of Walter Platt's 2-finger handshake a year ago. The casual contempt. The dismissal. I wondered if Nola even knew I was in the hospital. Probably not. She was at Walter's house in Highland Park. I'd seen her car there this morning. She didn't know I knew. Some things don't change. Tonight I sat alone in a hospital hallway with a burned hand and no family coming. In 3 days, I'd sit alone at my kitchen table with a medal and divorce papers. The emergency room doors opened. A man and woman emerged, both in nice clothes that looked rumpled from 3 hours of waiting. The man was 45 maybe, with graying hair and the posture of success. The woman was younger eyes, red from crying but fierce with relief. Alden Whitfield was a successful commercial real estate investor in Dallas who walked out of his son's hospital room and into the hallway where the man who saved Ethan's life sat alone with a burned hand and no family coming, a detail he would never forget. Irene Whitfield, 43 and a former elementary school teacher who'd raised Ethan to be kind and work hard, recognized immediately that I was the kind of man who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. Irene saw me first. Her eyes went wide. She ran. She crossed the hallway in 5 steps and threw her arms around me before I could stand up. I was still sitting when she embraced me, crying into my shoulder, her whole body shaking. "You saved my son," she said. Her voice broke. "You saved my son. How do I thank you for that?" I didn't know what to say. My right hand came up awkwardly to pat her back. My left hand stayed in my lap, useless and throbbing. Alden followed. He waited for Irene to step back, then extended both hands toward me. Not one hand, both. He took my right hand in both of his and looked me directly in the eyes. The gratitude there was so genuine it made my throat tighten. "Oh," the doctor said, "another 30 seconds and Ethan would have—" Alden stopped, shook his head. "But you didn't give it 30 seconds. You gave it 8. "I just did what anyone would do," I said. "No." Alden's grip on my hand tightened. Everyone else ran. 600 people in that gymnasium ran away from the danger. You ran toward it, toward my son. Gratitude is a currency most people spend too quickly. But some people, rare ones, save it like interest in a bank account and let it compound over years. "How's Ethan?" I asked. "Stable." Irene wiped her eyes. "They're keeping him overnight for observation, but the cardiologist said his heart rhythm is normalizing. No permanent damage. He's going to be fine. Because of you." Alden looked at my bandaged hand. "And you're injured because you saved him." "It's not bad," I lied. "It's 2nd-degree burns," Irene said. "Across your palm. That's going to take weeks to heal." "Worth it," I said. Alden pulled out his wallet, drew out a business card. "I don't know how to repay you, but I'm going to try. For the rest of my life, I'm going to try. You don't need to—" "Yes, I do." He pressed the card into my right hand. "Alden Whitfield, commercial real estate. That's my office, my cell, my email. You need anything at all, you call me. You hear me?" I looked at the card. Expensive stock. Embossed lettering. "Just let the boy grow up well," I said. "Have a good life. That's all I need." Irene pulled a pen from her purse, took the card back, wrote 2 more numbers on the back. "That's our home phone. That's my cell. You call us, please." She looked at my left hand, then at my right hand, at the wedding ring I still wore. "Is your wife coming?" she asked gently. I paused too long. "She's somewhere else tonight." Alden and Irene exchanged a glance. Something passed between them. Understanding. Concern. Alden gripped my shoulder. "You're not alone in this," he said. "Whatever you need, however long it takes. You saved our son's life. We don't forget that." I nodded. Didn't trust myself to speak. I'd been married 26 years to a woman who wouldn't visit me in a hospital. I'd known this man for 20 minutes, and he was offering me everything he had. They left after another few minutes of conversation. Ethan wanted to see me, they said. Tomorrow, when he was stronger. They made me promise to come back. I promised. I put Alden Whitfield's business card in my wallet next to my electrician's license and my insurance card. Just another piece of paper, just another contact. I didn't know that 10 years later, this man would be standing in a country club ballroom, watching me destroy Walter Platt. I didn't know this man would be the only person I'd completely trust for the next decade. I didn't know that his gratitude would compound like interest in a bank account until it became the foundation of everything. All I knew was he shook my hand with both of his, and that mattered. Trust would come later. First came evidence. 6 months after saving Ethan Whitfield's life, I found the proof that Walter Platt had almost killed him, and it was sitting in a filing cabinet 3 feet from my desk, exactly where it had been for 2 years. Summer 2012. The school district required a full electrical system audit 6 months after the incident. Standard procedure after a major safety failure. I'd been conducting the inspection for 3 days, working alone in the basement maintenance room, methodically examining every panel, every breaker, every junction box in the building. I was 58 years old, divorced, living alone in a house that felt too big without Nola and too quiet without arguments. The maintenance room had become my refuge. Fluorescent lights, concrete walls, the smell of machine oil and electrical insulation. A place where things made sense because they followed physical laws that didn't change based on how much money you had. I was examining the equipment Walter Platt's company had installed during the 2010 athletic facility renovation when I saw it. The rating plate on the main electrical panel. Residential grade. Maximum continuous load 200 amps. I stared at it for 10 seconds. Checked the adjacent panel. Same rating. Residential. 200 amps. The gymnasium during the basketball game had been pulling at least 400 amps. 600 people. Full lighting, heating system, scoreboard, sound system, every circuit at maximum draw. 200 amp residential panels trying to handle 400 amp industrial load. It was like putting bicycle tires on a semi-truck and wondering why they exploded. The equipment didn't match. Not even close. I pulled the file box from the storage shelf. The 2010 renovation. The one Walter Platt's company had overseen. The one Nola had been so impressed by at the fundraiser. The one the school board had praised for coming in under budget and ahead of schedule. I spread the files across my desk under the maintenance room's fluorescent lights. Original bid specifications dated March 2010. Standard A industrial grade electrical panel system, 600 amp service UL listed commercial components installed per National Electrical Code Article 220. Price $1,247,000. Signed contract with Lone Star Electrical Services, LLC. Approved by school board. Work completed August 2010. I pulled the delivery receipts. Different model numbers. I grabbed the manufacturer catalog from my shelf. The same catalog I'd been using for 20 years. Cross-referenced the model numbers from the delivery receipts against the specifications. Standard C residential grade panels. 200 amp maximum service. Not UL listed for commercial applications. Retail value according to the catalog, $400,000. Price paid by the school district, $1,247,000. Difference, $847,000. $847,000. That's what Walter Platt stole. That's what a 17-year-old boy's life was worth to him. Less than $1 million. I sat back in my chair, looked at the invoices, looked at the equipment specifications, looked at the delivery receipts with the wrong model numbers that someone had hoped no one would ever cross-reference. The invoices said one thing, the equipment said another. And a 17-year-old boy had nearly died because of the difference. I pulled out my phone, opened the web browser. Texas Secretary of State Business Registry. Typed Lone Star Electrical Services, LLC. Registered Agent Platt Development Group. Walter's Company. Walter's Shell Company. Walter's Fraud. He'd bid industrial-grade equipment at industrial-grade prices, installed residential-grade garbage, and pocketed the difference. Nearly $1 million. And when the cheap equipment failed under load and nearly electrocuted a teenager, he'd stood in my kitchen 3 days later with his hand on my soon-to-be ex-wife's shoulder and told me that nobility doesn't pay mortgages. I picked up my phone, started to dial the school district's main number. Stopped, put the phone down. Thought, Walter Platt had money. He had lawyers. He had connections on the school board. Half of them had attended his fundraisers, accepted his donations, praised his generosity in public meetings. He had Nola, who would testify that he was a good man, a generous man, a man who cared about education and children. What did I have? Invoices and delivery receipts. Equipment with the wrong rating plates. A filing cabinet full of paperwork that his lawyers would argue could be interpreted differently, could be explained away, could be the result of honest mistakes made by subcontractors. If I called the police right now, filed a report, started an investigation, Walter would know about it within hours, and he'd bury it before the weekend. Documents would disappear. Witnesses would forget. Shell companies would dissolve. Lawyers would file motions and countersuits and claim that a disgruntled ex-husband was making false accusations against the man who'd married his wife. I'd been divorced from Nola for 4 months. The court had finalized it in March. Everyone knew I had motive to make trouble for Walter. He has money. He has lawyers. He has Nola telling everyone what a great man he is. What do I have? Invoices and burn scars. I looked at the files spread across my desk. Nearly $1 million in fraud. Equipment that nearly killed a child. Evidence that could send Walter Platt to prison for years. And if I reported it now, he'd escape. Probably. Money usually wins against paperwork. How long should you wait to spring a trap? Until your enemy has forgotten it exists. Until he's celebrated. Until he believes he's won. I stood up. Walked to the photocopier in the corner of the maintenance room. Made copies of everything. Every invoice. Every delivery receipt. Every specification sheet. Every piece of evidence. Took the originals home that night. Locked them in my personal safe in the bedroom closet. 3-inch steel door. Combination lock that only I knew. The copies went back into the filing cabinet at school. If Walter ever came looking, he'd find paperwork. Nothing missing. Nothing to make him suspicious. I sat in my maintenance room at 8 o'clock that night alone, looking at the filing cabinet that held proof of Walter Platt's crime. If I make noise now, he'll destroy the evidence. I need him proud. I need him celebrated. I need him standing in front of everyone who matters, accepting credit he doesn't deserve. Then I overthrow him. I locked the maintenance room door and went home. Patience, I'd learned, is just anger that knows how to wait. Pride takes time to build. So does the money to destroy it. What do you do when you're 58 years old, divorced, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and the only thing you know better than electrical systems is exactly how criminals cheat them? You become a consultant. Late 2012, I retired early from Hawthorne High School. Mutual agreement. The divorce had made things awkward with Nola still working in the front office, and the school board preferred clean breaks to uncomfortable hallway encounters. They gave me a modest pension enough to cover rent and groceries in a Richardson apartment, not enough for anything else. I registered Fox Electrical Consulting, LLC, with the Texas Secretary of State. Filing fee $300. Office my kitchen table. Equipment, my laptop, my 40 years of experience, and a filing cabinet full of copied documents showing exactly how Walter Platt had defrauded the school district. I had one advantage over every other electrical consultant in Texas. I knew every trick. Alden Whitfield made the introduction. He'd kept in touch since the hospital called every month to check on my hand, invited me to Ethan's basketball games, refused to let me disappear into the background. In January 2013, he called with a business proposition. G. Harvey, I have a colleague at Texas Energy Partners. They're building a new substation. The contractor's invoices look off. Would you be willing to review them? I drove to their facility in Houston the next week. Walked into that substation and saw Walter Platt's playbook. Different contractor, different company name, same shell company structure, same invoice tricks, same substitution scheme, premium equipment, build cheap equipment, delivered difference pocketed. I saved them $340,000. The VP asked how I spotted it so fast. I didn't say, because my ex-wife's husband taught me exactly what fraud looks like when you study it for 6 months straight while sitting alone in a maintenance room. I said experience. Word spread. By spring 2013, I had 3 clients. Energy companies mostly referred through Alden's business network. They needed independent audits of contractor work on substations, distribution centers, industrial facilities. They paid me $8,000 to $12,000 per audit. I worked from my apartment, traveled to sites, wrote detailed reports, identifying exactly where contractors were cutting corners and inflating costs. I knew every trick because I'd studied one man's playbook for 2 years. Walter Platt was my textbook. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say. But they don't tell you that while it's cooling, you can use the heat to cook something else entirely. 2013 became 2014. 2014 became 2015. My consulting practice grew. Energy companies, manufacturing plants, data centers across Texas. They hired me because I had a gift for spotting the same patterns shell companies registered to the contractor's parent corporation invoice amounts that matched bid specs, but delivery receipts that showed different model numbers, equipment rated for residential use, installed in commercial facilities. I became a specialist in detecting the exact fraud tactics Walter had pioneered. By 2015, I was billing $180,000 annually. I lived in the same one-bedroom apartment in Richardson, drove the same Ford, ate the same meals, banked everything above basic living expenses. Farah visited that Christmas. She'd graduated from her master's program, landed a senior engineering position in Seattle. We sat in my small apartment with Chinese takeout, and she looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes since before the divorce: pride. "Dad, you're making more now than you ever did at Hawthorne," she said. I picked at my lo mein. "Turns out expertise in fraud is valuable. You built this from nothing, after everything that happened." "Not nothing," I said. "I had a very thorough education in how criminals operate." She understood. She always understood. By the end of 2015, I had $890,000 saved. More than Walter had stolen. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd earned more by preventing fraud than Walter had made by committing it. 2016 and 2017 brought the major contracts: Gulf Coast refineries, wind farm developments, solar installation projects across West Texas. My reputation had grown. The electrical consultant who never missed fraud, who saved companies millions, who charged premium rates because he delivered premium results. Companies paid $50,000 and up per audit. Not because I was expensive, because I was worth it. I'd spent 5 years becoming the thing Walter Platt feared most, a man who understood his methods and had the credibility to expose them. And I'd gotten paid $2.1 million to learn. March 2017, I sat at my kitchen table, still my office, after 5 years reviewing my financial statement. $2,104,385.17. That's what the account said. 5 years of patient work. Living on 30% of my income. Banking everything else. Conservative investments, compound interest. The discipline of a man who'd spent 40 years maintaining electrical systems and knew the value of steady, reliable growth. Walter Platt stole $847,000 using cheap equipment and shell companies. I made $2.1 million by teaching others how to stop men like Walter. I sat there at my desk, thinking about the man who ruined my marriage, who nearly killed Ethan Whitfield, who stood in my kitchen with his hand on Nola's shoulder and told me that nobility doesn't pay mortgages, who shook my hand with 2 fingers like I was beneath him. That man gave me my entire career, not intentionally, not willingly, but completely. Every client I landed came because I understood fraud better than anyone else in Texas. Every dollar I earned came from expertise Walter's crime had forced me to develop. Every audit I conducted used knowledge I'd gained by studying his invoices, his shell companies, his substitution schemes. Walter Platt tried to destroy me. Instead, he educated me. The man who called me the maintenance man with contempt taught me how to become rich. Life has a dark sense of humor. I closed the financial statement. Looked at the number again. $2,104,385.17. Enough. Not for retirement. Not for luxury. Not for anything Walter would understand. Enough for something else. Something Walter would never see coming until it was too late. A scholarship fund, in Emily's name, my first wife, the woman who spent 20 years teaching other people's children and never once asked for recognition. Administered by Hawthorne High School, public, permanent. The kind of legacy that gets praised at reunions and ceremonies and community events. The kind of legacy a man like Walter Platt would want to claim credit for. I picked up my phone, called Principal Garrett Thorne, made an appointment. The man who tried to ruin my marriage, who shook my hand with 2 fingers like I was beneath him, who installed cheap equipment that nearly electrocuted a 17-year-old boy to death. That man taught me how to become rich. Not intentionally, not willingly, but completely. Every dollar of my $2.1 million came from understanding exactly what Walter Platt had done. Life has a dark sense of humor, and I was about to make the punchline even darker. The punchline required a stage. I built it in spring 2016 with a cashier's check and a conversation that confused a well-meaning principal for 5 years. I walked into the office of Hawthorne High School's principal, carrying a brown envelope with a cashier's check for $2.1 million and a plan that would take 5 years to spring. Garrett Thorne was 52 years old in 2016, principal of Hawthorne High for 7 years. He remembered me as the maintenance officer who'd saved a student's life in 2012 and was utterly unprepared for the day that same man walked into his office with a check for $2.1 million and instructions that made no sense until 5 years later. I'd called ahead, made an appointment, told his secretary it was about a donation. Thorne stood when I entered, extended his hand. "Harvey Fox, good to see you." I shook his hand, sat in the chair across from his desk, placed the brown envelope on the polished wood between us. "You mentioned a donation," Thorne said. "That's very generous." I pushed the envelope toward him. "Open it." He opened it, pulled out the cashier's check. His eyes went wide. "Harvey, this is $2.1 million. This is the largest single donation in the school's history." "I know. I don't understand." You were a maintenance officer here. Where did you— I was consulting, I said. 5 years of good work. I want it to go to students who need it. Kids whose parents work 2 jobs. Kids like I was. Thorne set the check down carefully. This is extraordinary. We can establish scholarships, upgrade STEM facilities, and replace the electrical system, I said. With properly rated commercial equipment. He nodded. He knew what I meant. The legal documents are in the envelope. I continued. Perpetual endowment, independent trustees. Fox Electrical Consulting LLC is the donor of record. Not your name personally. No. Thorne pulled out the legal documents, scanned them, stopped at the fund name. Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund, he read aloud. Not Harvey Fox Scholarship. No. Who's Emily Mercer? Emily was my first wife. She taught 2nd grade for 20 years. Mercer was her maiden name before she became Emily Fox. She died in 2004 before any of this happened. She never knew what Walter did. She never got to see what the district became. This fund is hers. Revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about letting them destroy themselves. You just have to build the stage and wait for them to take the spotlight. Thorne set the documents down. Donors usually want recognition for this kind of generosity. A plaque, a ceremony, your name on the building. I don't want any of that. Why not? Because I'm not interested in recognition. I'm interested in the money reaching the right students at the right time. Thorne leaned back. This doesn't make sense. You save over $2 million, give it all away, and you don't want anyone to know it was you. That's correct. Harvey, Garrett. I leaned forward. I need you to understand something very important. The anonymity isn't modesty. It's strategy. He frowned. Strategy for what? For what comes next. I paused. If someone else takes credit for this fund, and someone will you say nothing, you correct nothing, until I give you explicit permission. The confusion on Thorne's face deepened. Why would you let someone steal credit for your generosity? Because timing matters more than credit. I don't understand. You don't need to understand now, I said. You just need to agree. Can you do that? Thorne looked at the check, at the legal documents, at me. When would you give me permission to reveal the truth? You'll know, I said, when the time is right, when the right people are watching, when it matters most. That's when you speak. And until then, the Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund is anonymous. If someone claims they donated it, you smile and thank them. You don't confirm. You don't deny. You stay silent. A trap only works if the bait is irresistible. And there's nothing more irresistible to a man like Walter Platt than credit for generosity he didn't earn. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. Harvey, are you setting someone up? I'm setting up the truth, I said. Sometimes the truth needs the right moment to land, the right audience, the right context. Who do you think will take credit? I didn't answer that question. Thorne sighed, looked at the check again. This money will change lives, Harvey. Dozens of students, maybe hundreds over the years. I know, and you're absolutely certain you don't want recognition. I'm absolutely certain I want recognition at the right time, not before. He extended his hand across the desk. I don't fully understand what you're doing, but I trust you, and I'll honor your wishes. I shook his hand. Thank you. How will I know when it's time? I'll tell you, I said. Directly, clearly. You won't have any doubt. I stood up, straightened my jacket. Thorne stood as well, still holding the check. Harvey, why don't you want credit for this? Why let someone else take it? I looked at him across the desk. Because my name doesn't matter right now, Garrett. It matters when it's spoken at the right time and the right place to the right people. You'll know when that moment comes. And when it does, when someone is standing in front of everyone who matters, accepting praise for generosity they didn't provide, that's when you tell the truth. I left his office, walked through the hallways I'd maintained for 11 years, past the gymnasium where Ethan Whitfield had nearly died, past the maintenance room where I'd discovered the fraud. The trap was set. The bait was irresistible. All I needed now was patience. 4 years, maybe 5. Walter Platt would hear about an anonymous scholarship fund transforming Hawthorne High School. He'd hear about the mysterious Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund that no one could trace. He'd see an opportunity to claim credit for generosity he didn't provide, and he'd take it. Because men like Walter always do. He took it, exactly as I knew he would. For 4 years, I watched Walter Platt accept applause for generosity he didn't provide, and every time he smiled and nodded and said thank you, I added another page to the file that would destroy him. 2017, Spring Parent Meeting at Hawthorne High School. Principal Garrett Thorne stood at the podium in the library and announced the Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund had awarded its first scholarships, 10 students full tuition support, funded by an anonymous donor who wanted to remain private. Walter Platt sat in the third row with Nola beside him. He was on the school's advisory board, known for his donations to the athletic facility, his name on the new library. Someone from the audience asked if the Emily Mercer Fund was another one of his initiatives. Walter paused, smiled, glanced at Thorne. "I'm always happy to support Hawthorne's mission," he said. "Not yes, not no. Just enough to let the assumption stand." Thorne saw it, made a note in the margin of his program, said nothing. I wasn't there. I heard about it from Thorne's phone call that night. He asked if it was time to correct the record. I said no. Let Walter get comfortable. 2018. Parent Gala. Black tie event in the gymnasium, the same gymnasium where Ethan Whitfield had nearly died 6 years earlier. Walter and Nola arrived in formal wear, Nola in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension used to be. Parents congratulated Walter on the scholarship fund. He accepted their thanks with practiced humility. "Education is an investment in our community's future," he said. "I'm fortunate to be in a position to contribute, still not claiming it directly, but not correcting anyone either." Nola stood beside him, smiling. I knew from Thorne's documentation that during the cocktail hour she'd pulled Walter aside and whispered something. Thorne had been close enough to hear. Mercer was Harvey's mother's name, Nola said. Walter dismissed it. Coincidence. He doesn't have this kind of money. She knew. Nola knew her ex-husband had donated over $2 million. Knew Walter was stealing credit. And she chose silence. Chose the comfortable life in Highland Park over the truth. Complicity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a woman in an expensive dress choosing not to ask questions. 2019. Walter stopped being subtle. Parent Gala speech standing at the same podium where Thorne had announced the fund, Walter talked about his commitment to education, his belief in investing in students' futures, his pride in supporting Hawthorne for over a decade. "The Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund represents what I believe philanthropy should be," he said. "Not just money, but genuine commitment to the next generation." He never said the words, "I donated it." He never had to. Everyone assumed. And Walter let them. Thorne called me that night. "Harvey, he's taking full credit now. When can I tell them the truth?" "Not yet," I said. "Let him get comfortable. Let him believe it's his." 2020. Walter proposed renaming the fund. Brought it to the advisory board with legal paperwork. Wanted to call it the Platt Mercer Educational Endowment. Put his name first. The lawyers stopped him. Perpetual endowment restrictions, donor specifications. The fun name was legally protected. Walter was furious, Thorne told me. Tried to argue, tried to leverage his position on the board. Failed. But he didn't stop claiming credit. Just claimed it louder. A lie is like a house built on sand. It stands fine when the weather is calm, but all you need is one wave at exactly the right angle to wash the foundation away. Principal Thorne kept meticulous records. Private log locked in his desk drawer. Every instance of Walter accepting credit. Every speech. Every handshake. Every thank you he didn't deserve. By the end of 2020, Thorne had documented 47 separate instances. 47 times Walter Platt had stolen credit for my donation. 47 pieces of evidence that he was a fraud in more ways than one. I had the electrical contracts from 2010, the delivery receipts, the equipment specifications, the shell company registration, the evidence that Walter had nearly killed Ethan Whitfield by installing substandard equipment. But there was one piece I'd never been able to access, one document that had always been just out of reach. The original 2012 electrical contract invoice from the Hawthorne School Board files. The board-level paperwork that showed Walter's signature on the fraudulent bid. I'd seen copies, references, secondary documentation, but never the original. It arrived in September 2021, 3 months before the reunion. Unmarked envelope, no return address, no postage stamp hand-delivered to my consulting office. Inside the invoice. Original. Walter's shell company signature clear as day. The equipment substitution documented in the contractor's handwriting with Walter's approval initials in the margin. And a handwritten note on plain paper. Mr. Fox, I should have given this to you 9 years ago. Better late than never. V.A.T. Vernon Townsend. I'd known Vernon peripherally from Hawthorne. He'd been on the school board from 2010 to 2012, served during the electrical renovation project. Basketball coach Sterling Wade had mentioned him once. Vernon and Walter had been business partners for 15 years, joint real estate developments across Dallas. Had been partners. I made a phone call, found out what happened. September 2021. Walter Platt had forced Vernon Townsend out of their $2.3 million joint real estate development. Legal, ruthless. Leveraged a technicality in their partnership agreement to buy Vernon out at 30 cents on the dollar. Vernon Townsend was 64 years old, financially devastated. 15 years of partnership destroyed by a man who valued money more than loyalty. So Vernon went to his storage unit. Found his old school board files from 2010 to 2012. Located the one document Walter thought was safely buried in bureaucratic archives that no civilian could access, and he gave it to me. 10 years, 47 documented lies, 1 missing invoice, and 3 months until the reunion where Walter Platt would stand at his highest point. I held the invoice in my hands, the last piece of evidence delivered by the only other person who knew the truth and had finally been betrayed enough to care. The file was complete. The trap was perfect. All that remained was the execution. Execution required one more soldier. I recruited my daughter 2 weeks before the reunion with a briefcase full of evidence and complete honesty about what I needed her to risk. 2 weeks before the reunion, I opened the brown leather briefcase on my kitchen table and showed my daughter what 10 years of patience looks like when you stack it in chronological order. Farah flew from Seattle Friday night, arrived Saturday afternoon. 32 years old senior software engineer, my daughter, who'd chosen me over her mother's money 9 years ago and never looked back. She walked into my kitchen, saw the briefcase on the table, stopped. "Is that it?" she asked. "That's it." I opened the latches, lifted the lid, started laying documents across the table in chronological order. 2012 electrocution incident reports, hospital records showing Ethan Whitfield's cardiac monitoring my second-degree burns, the 2 weeks we spent in adjacent rooms. Photographs of my bandaged hand that I'd never shown anyone. 2012 electrical invoices, the bid specifications, the delivery receipts with the wrong model numbers, the manufacturer catalogs showing the substitution, the Texas Secretary of State registration linking Lone Star Electrical Services, LLC, to Platt Development Group, 2016 Scholarship Fund establishment papers, the cashier's check for $2.1 million, the legal documents creating the Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund, the perpetual endowment restrictions that prevented Walter from renaming it, 2017 to 2020 documentation. Principal Thorne's private log with 47 instances of Walter claiming or accepting credit, newspaper clippings, parent meeting minutes, photos of Walter at the podium accepting thanks. September 2021. Vernon Townsend's unmarked envelope. The original 2012 Hawthorne School Board invoice showing Walter's shell company signature and the equipment substitution in the contractor's handwriting. Farah stood at the table, silent, looking at 10 years laid out like a prosecutor's timeline. "I knew you were planning something," she said quietly. "I didn't know it was this thorough. Every document dated cross-referenced, independently verifiable," I said. "Walter can't lawyer his way out of physical evidence." She picked up the hospital photograph. The one showing my left hand 3 days after the incident, palm and 3 fingers wrapped in white gauze, the skin underneath blistered and raw. "You never showed me this photo," she said. "Your hand was—" She stopped. "Count-degree burns," I said. "Worth it. Some fathers leave their daughters money. Mine left me a masterclass in patience strategy and the difference between revenge and justice." Farah set down the photo, picked up Vernon's September envelope, pulled out the invoice, read it once, read it twice, looked at me. "How long have you had this?" "But 3 months. Vernon Townsend sent it after Walter forced him out of their business partnership. I'd been missing this piece for 9 years. She read the invoice again. Her finger traced Walter's signature, the contractor's notes in the margin, the approval initials. "You've had most of this evidence since 2012, she said. "Why wait 10 years? "Because revenge served cold is just punishment," I said. "Revenge served at exactly the right temperature is justice." She picked up the scholarship fund documents, read the fund name, Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund, her middle name, my mother's maiden name. "You named a $2.1 million fund after me," she said, "and didn't tell me. Why, I wanted you to find out when it mattered, when the name meant something, when everyone was watching." She sat down at the table, spread the documents out in front of her. The timeline became clear. The trap became visible. "This isn't revenge," she said. "This is a legal case." "It's both." She looked at me. "What do you need me to do, Dad? Before I tell you what I asked my daughter to do at that reunion, are you still with me? Comment A if you'd volunteer to be bait for your father, or B if you'd say no, and add one short reason why. Quick note, some details ahead are recreated for storytelling impact, but the lesson is what matters. I sat down across from her. "The reunion is in 10 days. Walter will be there. He'll be honored. He'll probably try to rename the scholarship fund again, claim it publicly one more time. Nola will be by his side. And I need you there as visible presence. You're the bait. They'll see you. They'll know you're my daughter. And if I know Walter, he'll say something. Do something. In front of everyone." Farah didn't hesitate. "What do you need me to do?" "Stand still. Let them attack first. Don't react. I'll handle the rest." She looked at the evidence spread across the table. Looked at me. 68 years old. Patient as stone. A man who'd spent 10 years building a case instead of throwing a punch. "You'll be the target," I said. Walter will see you know you're my daughter. He might say something cruel. Can you stand there and take it? For 10 years you stood there and took it, Farah said. I can handle one night. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. You did it for me. Now I do it for you. She stood up, walked around the table, put her hand on my shoulder. Okay, Dad. I'll be the bait. She smiled. Actually, I want to be the bait. Bait isn't about being weak. It's about being brave enough to stand in the open while the trap closes around everyone else. We sat at the kitchen table until the sun went down, papers spread between us like a battle plan. 10 years of evidence. 47 documented lies. One daughter willing to walk into Hawthorne Country Club as the visible target. The reunion was 10 days away. All the pieces were in place, the evidence, the allies, the witnesses, the stage. Now I needed one thing. Walter Platt to walk in himself, stand at that podium, and accept credit one more time in front of everyone who mattered. And 10 days later, he did exactly that. 10 days passed. And on the morning of the reunion, I made my final strategic decision. I chose to look exactly like the man Walter Platt thought I was. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, holding 2 suits, a $600 wool blend I'd bought for consulting meetings, and a 15-year-old polyester one that looked exactly like what Walter expected a poor electrician to own, and I chose the polyester. Slightly too large now. I'd lost weight since 2012. The fabric was worn at the elbows, shiny at the knees. The kind of suit a man wears when he can't afford better. Except I could afford better. I had over $2 million in consulting revenue behind me. I owned 3 good suits. But today, I wanted Walter comfortable. I wanted him to see exactly what he expected a defeated man who couldn't afford the life his ex-wife now lived. Farah texted at 4 o'clock. Ready when you are. I picked her up from the Richardson Hotel at 5. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not expensive looking. We'd discussed this. Nothing that would make Walter think I'd given her money. Nothing that would complicate the narrative he'd already written in his head. We drove to Hawthorne Country Club in my Ford. The same Ford I'd driven for 15 years. Primer gray patches where the paint had worn through. I pulled into the parking lot at 6. Opened the trunk. Looked at the brown leather briefcase one last time. 10 years of evidence. USB drive with Principal Thorne's documentation. Vernon's invoice. Hospital records. Electrical contracts. Scholarship fund papers. Everything. 10 years in this trunk, I said quietly. 10 years in my safe. Tonight, it all comes out. Farah stood beside me. Are you nervous? No. I'm ready. Are you? I'm ready. I closed the trunk. Left the briefcase there. I'd retrieve it when the time was right. We walked toward the entrance. Hawthorne Country Club looked exactly like money. Always looks clean, bright, expensive without trying. Chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters in black vests carrying champagne on silver trays. 200 people in their early 70s wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly pension used to be. Class of 1971's 50th reunion. I scanned the room as we entered. Celeste Grant, 45 years old, an investigative reporter for the Dallas Tribune, was setting up camera equipment at a side table. She'd been invited to cover what she thought was a feel-good story about the Emily Mercer Scholarship Fund's anniversary. She had no idea she was about to document the most dramatic public exposure she'd ever witnessed. Alden and Irene Whitfield stood across the room near the bar. Alden saw me, nodded once. Irene squeezed his arm. They knew. They'd been briefed. Principal Garrett Thorne stood near the small stage at the front of the ballroom, laptop open on the podium table. Ready. Walter Platt stood near the bar with Nola beside him, surrounded by 5 or 6 wealthy classmates. He wore a suit that probably cost $3,000. Nola wore a dress that matched. They were laughing, holding court. The king and queen of the reunion. Walter saw me. His expression didn't change. Just a small smile. Satisfaction. Walking into that country club in my old suit felt like a boxer entering the ring in torn gloves. Everyone thinks you're already beaten, which is exactly when you're most dangerous. Farah and I entered the main ballroom. Eyes turned. Whispers started. Is that Harvey Fox? I thought he wouldn't show. Who's the woman with him? His daughter, Farah. He looks exactly the same. Poor guy. I heard it all, registered it all. Felt Farah stiffen beside me. Ignore them, I whispered. Let them look. We walked toward the seating chart near the entrance. Found our names. Table 12. Decent placement. Middle of the room. Then Walter started moving. He set down his drink. Said something to Nola. Crossed the ballroom toward us with deliberate steps, voice projecting before he even reached us. Harvey Fox. Walter's voice carried across 20 feet. Loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. Loud enough to be performance. I didn't expect country clubs let the maintenance crew in nowadays. People turned. Some laughed. Others looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet. Walter stopped 3 feet in front of me. Nola beside him. Both of them looking down at me, not physically. I was 2 inches taller, but the expression on their faces made height irrelevant. Chow. Harvey never suited places like this, Nola said. Her voice was quieter than Walter's, but sharp enough to cut. Some people know their limits. More laughter. Nervous now. People weren't sure if this was friendly ribbing or something uglier. I felt Farah's body go rigid beside me. Felt her breathing quicken. Felt her about to turn around and say something that would blow the entire plan. I squeezed her shoulder. Gentle pressure, firm message. Looked directly at Walter. Smiled calmly. Walter, I said, you look good. Success suits you. Turned away. Started walking toward our table. Farah didn't move immediately. I felt her hesitate. Felt the rage vibrating through her. Farah, I said quietly. Come on. She followed, but her fists were clenched. Her jaw was tight. Her breathing was heavy. We walked 10 steps, got halfway to table 12. I leaned close, whispered, not yet, not the time. Dad! Her voice was strained. I know what he did. Let him. Let everyone see what he is. 20 people heard Walter's insult. 20 people laughed or looked away. In 90 minutes, those same 20 people would be on their feet applauding me. We reached table 12, sat down. Farah's hands were shaking. How can you she started. Because this isn't about being right first, I said. It's about being right last. I felt Farah's breathing quicken beside me. Felt her body go rigid with rage. Felt her about to turn around and unleash 10 years of fury at the man who'd humiliated her father in front of 200 people. I squeezed her shoulder, gentle pressure, firm message. Leaned close and whispered 3 words. Not yet, sweetheart. Her fists were clenched. Her jaw was tight. But she nodded. And we sat at our table near the center of the room, exactly where Walter could see us, exactly where I needed to be. Because in 30 minutes, something would happen that would move us even lower. And I would thank him for it. 30 minutes later, Farah returned from the bar, holding 2 glasses of champagne. She stopped 3 feet from our table, staring at the name cards. We've been moved, she said. Our original seats, respectable placement near the center, were occupied by a couple I didn't recognize. Our name cards now sat at table 17, tucked in the corner beside the kitchen doors. The worst table in the ballroom. Every waiter carrying trays would pass within inches. Every crash of dishes would echo directly overhead. Walter stood near the bar watching, waiting for my reaction. I met his eyes across the room and nodded. A small gesture. Thank you. His forehead creased. He'd expected anger, embarrassment, protest. Instead, I'd given him gratitude. I picked up both name cards and walked to table 17. Farah followed her heels sharp against the marble. "Dad, this is ridiculous. We should say something." "And this is perfect," I said. She set down the champagne glasses harder than necessary. "Perfect. We're sitting next to the kitchen. We're sitting exactly where I need to be. The entry twist I'd wanted this table all along. Not the center where eyes could track every expression. Not the front where escape would mean crossing the entire ballroom. Here beside the kitchen doors, I had the exit 10 feet away. When the moment came, when everything collapsed around Walter, I could leave without spectacle. Revenge isn't about being seen winning. It's about watching them lose. I surveyed the room from my new vantage point. Every piece had fallen into position during the past 30 minutes. Alden Whitfield stood near the memorial scholarship display. His posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He'd arrived 20 minutes ago, shaken my hand without words. Just pressure. Acknowledgement. Garrett Thorne occupied a table near the stage, his principal's authority, making him visible, but not central. He'd avoided Walter completely since arriving a calculated distance that Walter hadn't noticed yet. Celeste Grant had positioned her camera crew along the back wall. 3 cameras. One aimed at the stage, one for wide shots, one roaming. Sterling Wade sat at the press table, his laptop open, the live stream icon already glowing. Vernon Townsend sat 2 tables away. His coaching instincts making him scan the room like he was reading a play before it developed. Every person I needed was here. Every position locked. How do you know when revenge is perfectly timed? When every variable aligns. Not because you forced them, but because you made alignment inevitable. Walter approached our table. His tuxedo was custom-fitted, his smile practiced. "Harvey, I apologize for the seating confusion," he said. The apology was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Magnanimous. There were some last-minute changes to accommodate the scholarship donors. "It's fine, Walter. This table suits me." His smile flickered. "Well, I'm glad you're understanding. Not everyone appreciates. I appreciate everything you've done tonight," I said. He blinked. Left. Farah leaned close. "What are you doing?" She'd letting him think he won. Across the ballroom, Nola Platt stood near the entrance, in an emerald dress that probably cost more than my truck. She'd been watching the room since she arrived. Her champagne glass barely touched. Now she was watching me. I saw the exact moment things shifted behind her eyes. Small observations assembling into pattern. Alden Whitfield shaking my hand, but avoiding Walter. Garrett Thorne positioned near the stage, but never approaching the scholarship display Walter dominated. Celeste Grant's cameras focused not on the reunion generally, but on specific positions. Sterling Wade's laptop showing a live stream of this exact room. The worst table in the ballroom occupied by the man Walter had just publicly humiliated, and that man smiling. Nola's blood went cold. I saw it in the way her fingers tightened on the champagne flute, the way her posture straightened. She understood. She moved toward Walter, her heels quick across the marble. But the ballroom was large and crowded, and Walter was already walking toward the stage. Garrett Thorne stood lifting a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, we're about to begin the program." Nola accelerated, but bodies blocked her path. A cluster of former teachers. A waiter carrying champagne. The natural chaos of a crowd settling. Walter stepped onto the small stage. Someone handed him the microphone. Nola reached the stage's edge 3 seconds too late. Walter's voice filled the ballroom. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It's been far too long since we've gathered like this, and I'm honored to share something very special with you." Nola tried to catch his eye, but Walter was looking at the crowd, at the cameras, at his moment. 10 years ago, Walter continued, I established the Platt Scholarship Foundation to honor the values that Hawthorne High taught us. excellence, integrity, and service. Tonight, I want to tell you the story of how that foundation began. Farah's hand found mine under the table. Nola stood frozen at the stage's edge, her face pale, knowing exactly what was about to happen and powerless to stop it. Walter smiled into the cameras, into the live stream, into the permanent record. It started, he said, with a tragedy that I helped prevent. The spotlight found Walter Platt like he was born for it. He stood center stage, microphone in hand, his tuxedo perfect under the lights. The ballroom quieted. 300 faces turned toward him. Celeste Grant's cameras tracked every angle. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Walter began. His voice carried warmth, practiced sincerity. "It's been far too long since we've gathered like this, and I'm honored to share something very special with you." Applause rippled through the room. I sat at table 17, 10 feet from the kitchen doors, and watched. Over the years, Walter continued, I've tried to give back to the school that shaped me. The library renovation, $200,000. We added computers, study spaces, resources our students desperately needed. More applause. Heads nodded. The STEM classroom, $350,000. Science and technology are the future, and Hawthorne deserves the best. He paused, letting the numbers settle, letting the crowd appreciate his generosity. But the scholarship fund, Walter said, his voice dropping to something intimate, confessional, that's been my proudest achievement. Because education is the greatest investment we can make in our community. The applause built, enthusiastic, genuine. I recognized faces in the crowd, teachers who'd known Emily Mercer, parents who'd watched Farah grow up, classmates who'd attended Emily's funeral. They were clapping, smiling, charmed by the man who'd stolen everything Emily built. The entry twist, Walter's polish was working. Even people who should have remembered were believing him. Farah's hand tightened on her champagne glass. Walter gestured to the screen behind him, where the Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund logo glowed, Emily's name in elegant script, her photo beside it. 10 years ago, Walter said, I established this foundation to honor the values that Hawthorne High taught us: excellence, integrity, and service. Integrity. The word came from his mouth without hesitation. The fund has grown to over $2 million. We've sent 43 students to college, changed 43 lives. He didn't mention Emily's initial capital, didn't mention her vision, her planning, her sacrifice. The applause continued. Garrett Thorne sat 3 tables away, his laptop open, his expression neutral, waiting. Sterling Wade's livestream counter showed 420 viewers. Growing. Walter's tone shifted, became philosophical. He gestured toward the back of the ballroom. So you know, he said, I've learned something over the years. There are 2 kinds of people in this world. Those who build legacies and those who dwell on the past. His hand swept past table 17, past me. Some people stay stuck, Walter continued, nursing old grievances, blaming others for their circumstances. While some people, he touched his chest, humble, choose to invest in the future. The crowd shifted. A few glances landed on me. Pity, judgment. Poor Harvey Fox, still bitter after all these years. Farah leaned close, her whisper sharp. Dad, we should let him talk, I said. My coffee cup sat before me, still half full, cooling. I lifted it, took a sip. Calm. Walter was giving me everything I needed. Every word, every gesture, every moment of arrogance, all recorded. All live-streamed. All permanent. How much applause does a thief earn before the truth catches him? Walter moved toward his closing, his voice building. Tonight I want to announce something exciting. The scholarship fund has been my life's work, but it's time to expand our vision. The screen behind him still showed Emily's name. Emily's face. "I'm excited to announce," Walter said, "that we'll be renaming the fund the Platt Family Foundation Scholarship. A more fitting name for the scale of contributions we're planning." He smiled, proud, generous. "We're going to triple the endowment, send 100 more students to college, build something that will last generations." The applause swelled. Farah's breath caught. "He's erasing her." "Yes," I said. My hand stopped shaking. This was the line I'd been waiting for. Not the theft. Not the lies. Not the credit stealing or the insults. The erasure of Emily's name from the legacy she'd built with her own money, her own vision, her own sacrifice. Walter wanted to replace her completely. Make it his. Done. I set down my coffee cup. The porcelain clinked softly against the saucer. Across the ballroom, Garrett Thorne's eyes met mine. His finger hovered over his laptop keyboard. Walter continued, oblivious. "The Platt Family Foundation will be a beacon for this community. A testament to what one person, what one family can accomplish when they dedicate themselves to service." Nola stood near the bar, her face pale. She'd moved closer to the stage during Walter's speech, but not close enough. Not fast enough. Celeste Grant's cameras tracked Walter. The red recording lights steady. Sterling Wade's livestream count hit 600 viewers. Alden Whitfield stood against the back wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But his posture had shifted. Ready. Vernon Townsend leaned forward at his table, watching not Walter, but the crowd. Reading the room like he'd read 1,000 games. Every piece was positioned. Walter raised his champagne glass. "So please join me in toasting the future the Platt Family Foundation Scholarship and the hundreds of lives it will change." The crowd began to rise, glasses lifting. I looked at Garrett Thorne. His finger still hovered. Walter smiled at the applauding crowd, the cameras, the live stream. At his moment of triumph. The exit twist came in silence. I gave one small nod. Thorne pressed enter. The screen behind Walter flickered. The screen behind Walter went black for 3 seconds, then filled with numbers. Garrett Thorne stood and walked to the stage. Walter turned, still holding the microphone, confusion crossing his face. "I apologize for the interruption." Thorne said, his principal's voice carrying authority. "But I need to clarify something before we continue. The scholarship fund's true sponsor." The screen lit up with a spreadsheet. Donation records. Dates running from 2016 through 2021. Amounts listed month by month, year by year, every transaction documented. At the top, in letters large enough to read from the back of the ballroom, donor Harvey Fox. Down $2.1 million, Thorne said. Every cent from Harvey Fox. The entry twist detonated in silence. The $2.1 million donor wasn't Walter Platt, but Harvey Fox, the retired maintenance officer sitting at table 17. A photograph appeared on screen. Me in my electrical maintenance uniform, 10 years younger, wrench in hand, standing beside a circuit panel at Hawthorne High. Walter's mouth opened, closed. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Thorne said. "Complete records, bank transfers, canceled checks, all verified." The ballroom fell into absolute silence. 300 people turned to look at table 17. At me. At the man Walter had mocked 30 minutes ago for being stuck in the past. Someone whispered, "Harvey Fox, the maintenance guy." Another voice, $2 million. Walter's face drained of color. His champagne glass still raised from his toast, lowered slowly. Nola gripped the edge of her table, knuckles white. Her emerald dress suddenly looked too bright, too visible. Farah stared at the screen, at the 9-year giving history displayed line by line. Her hand covered her mouth. "Dad," she whispered. Tears started. 2 million. "You never said." I'd told her about the scholarship, never mentioned the amount. Never explained what it cost the second mortgage the weekend shifts the truck I drove for 15 years instead of replacing. She was crying now, really crying, her shoulders shaking. The screen changed. More documents appeared. Detailed breakdowns. Monthly contributions ranging from $10,000 to $50,000. Every payment logged. Every sacrifice recorded. Someone near the front said, "He gave everything." Walter found his voice. I don't know where these numbers came from, but to school district records, Thorne said. Authenticated by 3 independent auditors. Nola leaned toward Walter, her urgent whisper carrying in the silent room. "We need to leave. Now." But Walter didn't move. Couldn't move. His world was collapsing in real time on camera, live streamed to hundreds of viewers. How long does truth stay buried before it claws its way back to light? 9 years. That's how long. Celeste Grant's cameras captured every angle. Sterling Wade's live stream counter hit 900 viewers. Growing fast. The screen went black again. When it lit up, financial documents filled the display. Contract records, invoice receipts, tender approval forms. Thorne's voice stayed level professional. Contract fraud, $847,000. Falsified electrical maintenance invoices submitted between 2010 and 2012. The documents scrolled, each one showing Walter's shell company, each one showing inflated costs, each one showing signatures that didn't match the authorization forms. These invoices, Thorne continued, were approved through a coordinated scheme involving forged signatures and backdated tender documents. Walter's world collapsed in high definition. His hand shot toward his table, toward Roland Kemp, his attorney who sat rigid with a briefcase across his lap. "Tell them this is fabricated," Walter said, desperate. "Tell them." Roland Kemp, 62 years old with silver hair and 3 decades of corporate law experience, shook his head slowly. "I can't. These are certified records." The screen changed again. Emails appeared. Subject lines. Message threads. Coordination between accounts. One name appeared repeatedly in the sender field, highlighted in yellow. Nola Platt. The exit twist landed like a second bomb. Nola's supporting emails, her complicity in the scheme exposed, alongside Walter's fraud. Tender manipulation. Thorne read from the screen. Quote, "We need to split the invoices across 3 months to avoid triggering the review threshold." Nola's face went sheet white. Another email appeared. Quote, "Walter's company submits Thursday. Make sure Henderson signs before he sees the competing bids." The room made a sound, collective breath, collective understanding. Walter grabbed for the microphone stand to steady himself. Someone's chair scraped. A glass clinked. A woman near the front covered her mouth. "The embezzlement funded personal accounts," Thorne said. "Country club memberships, luxury vehicles, the renovation of their home on Maple Ridge Drive." More documents scrolled. Bank statements, transfer records, expenditures. Every dollar traced, every lie documented. I stood from table 17. My chair scraped loud in the silence. Farah looked up, tears still streaming. I walked slowly toward the stage, past tables full of former classmates, past teachers who'd known me for 40 years, past faces showing shock, understanding, shame. Celeste Grant's cameras tracked my movement. Walter saw me coming. His breathing quickened, amplified by the microphone still clutched in his hand. Nola whispered something urgent, but Walter didn't respond. The screen behind him continued scrolling. More emails, more invoices, more proof. Vernon Townsend sat forward at his table, watching like this was the final play of a championship game. Alden Whitfield remained against the back wall, arms still crossed, expression unreadable. Sterling Wade's live stream count passed 1,200. I reached the center of the ballroom. Stopped. 30 feet of expensive carpet between me and the stage. The room stayed silent long enough to hear Farah crying at table 17, to hear Celeste's camera motors whirring, to hear Walter's breathing amplified by the microphone he still held. I looked straight at him across that distance. 9 years of silence. 9 years of waiting. 9 years of patience. Done. A chair scraped in the far corner, and Ethan Whitfield stood. 27 years old now. Cardiologist. Tall like his father with his mother's precise features. He wore a gray suit that fit the professional he'd become. The ballroom stayed silent as he walked toward the center of the room. Toward me. "I've tried to contact you for 10 years to say this publicly," Ethan said. His voice carried without amplification. Clear. Strong. I met his eyes across the distance. "I know. I told you it wasn't the right time." The entry twist landed quietly. Harvey had orchestrated even this testimony, telling Ethan to wait, timing it for maximum impact. Ethan turned to face the crowd. "The man you laughed at tonight is the reason I'm still standing here." Silence. In 2012, I was 17 months old. There was an electrical fire at Hawthorne High caused by faulty wiring that had been replaced 6 months earlier as part of a maintenance contract. He didn't look at Walter. Didn't need to. See, Harvey Fox pulled me out of that building. The doctors said he should have died from the shock. His hands were burned so badly they weren't sure he'd regain full use of them. Ethan's voice stayed level factual. He spent 4 months in physical therapy. Lost his position as head electrical officer because he couldn't hold tools properly for a year. Someone near the front whispered, "I didn't know." He never told anyone, Ethan said. Never asked for recognition. Never filed for compensation. Just went back to work when his hands healed. Farah was crying harder now. She'd known about the fire. Never knew about the burns, the therapy, the demotion. Irene Whitfield stood beside her son, holding a brown manila envelope worn soft at the edges. 10 years of careful storage. She opened it slowly, pulled out papers, a photograph. "I've kept this 10 years, Irene said, waiting for the right day." She showed the contents to the guests at the nearest table. A handwritten letter on hospital stationery dated March 2012. A photograph of me with both hands bandaged cradling an infant. Medical records documenting the rescue. The papers passed from table to table. Evidence becoming proof, becoming truth. Alden Whitfield stood near the back wall. "That's my nephew," he said to the guests around him. Harvey saved him. A woman at table 12 stared at the photograph. "Harvey Fox did this, the maintenance officer. Head electrical officer," someone corrected quietly. Before the fire, the photograph reached table 5. A man I didn't recognize studied it, then looked at me with something like shame. "Truth doesn't need volume, just time." Ethan walked closer. "I became a doctor because of what you did. Because you showed me what responsibility looks like." He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, steady. The hand of someone who saves lives now because someone once saved his. "Thank you," he said. Applause started. Scattered at first. A few people at the back tables, then more. Building. Garrett Thorne stood at the stage's edge holding the microphone. He extended it toward me. I walked to the stage, each step deliberate. The applause grew louder. I took the microphone. The room quieted, waiting. "I came tonight," I said, "because a child nearly died from someone else's greed." My voice carried across the ballroom. 9 years of silence ending in 40 words. Neither person took responsibility then. Today they have. I looked past the crowd to table 17. To Farah, still crying, still processing everything she'd learned tonight. Emily Fox taught 2nd grade in this district for 20 years. She believed every child deserved a chance regardless of what their parents earned. Her name deserves to stay on this fund. Permanently. The Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund logo still glowed on the screen behind me. I set down the microphone. You remember your first standing ovation. It starts like a wave. One person rises, then another. The sound builds not just clapping, but something deeper. Recognition, acknowledgement, vindication. The ballroom rose, 600 people. The same people who'd watched Walter exile me to table 17. The same people who'd applauded his generosity, his vision, his philanthropy. The same people who'd glanced at me with pity when Walter spoke about those stuck in the past. The exit twist arrived in thunder, complete public vindication, a standing ovation from the crowd that had laughed at him hours earlier. They stood and clapped. Celeste Grant's cameras captured it all. Every angle, every face. The live stream counter showed 1,800 viewers. Vernon Townsend clapped with his coach's powerful hands, the sound carrying. Garrett Thorne nodded once from the stage's edge. Respect. Alden and Irene Whitfield applauded beside their son. Sterling Wade recorded from the press table, his expression unreadable, but his camera steady. I saw Walter near the exit, frozen halfway to the door. Nola gripped his arm, trying to pull him forward, but he'd stopped moving. Stopped breathing, maybe. His face had gone gray. The applause continued. 40 seconds. Longer. I stepped off the stage. I didn't need them to applaud. I'd waited 9 years without their validation, built a legacy they'd never known existed, funded 43 futures while they'd praised a thief. But standing there while Farah cried, and Ethan smiled, and the cameras recorded, and Walter walked toward the exit with Nola gripping his arm. I admit it didn't sound bad. The room kept clapping. 600 people standing. 9 years ending. Justice finally loud enough to hear. Farah's arms reached me before the applause finished. She held on tight, her face pressed against my shoulder, her whole body shaking. The ballroom noise faded, clapping voices, camera shutters, until all I heard was her breathing. $2 million, she whispered. 9 years. You never said anything. Your mother's name needed to be there, that's all. She pulled back enough to look at me. Her makeup had run mascara, streaking her cheeks. Dad, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. The applause continued around us. 600 people standing, watching, witnessing. Across the ballroom, Walter stood. He took Nola's hand and moved toward the exit. His steps, quick, purposeful. Most guests were still focused on me, on Farah, on the moment. Walter moved through the edges of the crowd, like a man who'd done this before, left parties early, avoided uncomfortable conversations, disappeared when convenient. Not tonight. Marcus Bevan, the country club manager who'd been quietly briefed by Alden Whitfield an hour before the reunion began, stood blocking the exit doors with his hands folded. 58 years old, former military, the kind of man who followed instructions precisely. The entry twist, even this minor player, had been coordinated into Harvey's plan weeks ago. Walter stopped 3 feet from the exit. "Excuse me, we're leaving. Mr. Platt," Marcus said. His voice stayed professional, neutral. "I'm afraid the police are waiting outside. Questions about tonight's evidence." Walter's face went white. "This is a mistake. Tell them, I can't do that, sir." Nola stood beside Walter, her hand still in his. 40 years of marriage, 40 years of partnership, 40 years of public unity. She looked at Marcus, at the doors, at Walter. Slowly, carefully, she pulled her fingers free. "I can't," she said, quiet. "Not anymore." 40 years of marriage dissolved in the space between 2 hands. Walter stared at her. "Nola, they have my emails, Walter. They have everything." She stepped back. 1 step, then another. Walter turned to Marcus. "I want to speak to my attorney." "He's outside with the officers," Marcus said. "Roland Kemp arrived 10 minutes ago." Everything had been anticipated, every move planned. Marcus opened the doors. 2 Richardson police officers stood in the hallway, their uniforms pressed, their expressions professional. Behind them, Roland Kemp held his briefcase like a shield. Walter walked through the doors. They closed behind him with a soft click. Nola stood alone in the ballroom, her emerald dress suddenly looking too bright, her champagne glass forgotten on a nearby table. Someone she'd known for 40 years approached, offered something, maybe comfort, maybe distance, but Nola shook her head and walked to a corner table alone. Farah watched from beside me. "Is it over?" "The important part," I said. The reunion continued for another hour. People approached me, former teachers, old classmates, parents of scholarship recipients. They shook my hand, thanked me, apologized for not knowing. I accepted each word, each gesture, but didn't need them. I'd built Emily's legacy for Emily, not for applause. Celeste Grant packed her equipment at midnight. Sterling Wade closed his laptop after the live stream ended. Garrett Thorne helped the country club staff reset tables. The work was done, but the consequences were just beginning. Celeste's video went viral within 48 hours. 3.2 million views by Sunday morning. News outlets picked it up, local first, then regional, then national. The story had everything they wanted: fraud, revenge, redemption, a 9-year secret, and a standing ovation captured in high definition. Walter's name disappeared from charity boards by Tuesday. The Richardson Community Foundation removed his donor plaques on Wednesday. The country club suspended his membership pending investigation. Justice moves faster than fraud once it starts moving. The criminal investigation began Thursday. District Attorney's Office. Financial Crimes Division. Roland Kemp negotiated for 3 days before admitting the evidence was certified and unassailable. Nola moved out of the Maple Ridge house the following Monday. She filed for divorce Tuesday morning. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the real reason. She'd spent 10 years trying to impress people who now wouldn't return her calls. Farah visited every evening that first week. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. She asked about Emily, about the scholarship, about why I'd waited so long. I explained that revenge rushed is justice denied. She didn't fully understand, but she accepted it. She started managing the scholarship fund in January. Emily would have liked that. 2 weeks after the reunion, Vernon Townsend called. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since 2012, since the day he'd stood silent while Walter claimed credit for saving Ethan. "Ma saw the video," Vernon said. No greeting. "Whole country saw it. You did the right thing." The exit twist arrived quietly. Vernon Townsend, the coach who'd witnessed the original conflict in silence, finally calling to validate Harvey's actions. "You did too," I said. "Late, but you did." Vernon laughed. A sound I hadn't heard in 10 years. "Yeah. Late. Sorry about that. Better late than never, I suppose." "Suppose so." We stayed on the line for a moment. Not saying anything. Not needing to. "Take care, Harvey." "You too, Vernon." He hung up without saying goodbye. Some conversations don't need endings, just acknowledgement. I set down my phone and looked out the window. January snow falling light across Richardson. The scholarship fund secure. Emily's name protected. Farah understanding finally what her mother had meant to build. 9 years of waiting, 9 years of silence, 9 years of patience, worth every second. The knock came at 7 in the morning, soft enough I almost missed it. I was making coffee, still thinking about Vernon's call from the day before. Some conversations don't need endings, just acknowledgement. The knock came again, a little louder. Nola Platt stood alone on my front porch. No Walter, no phone, no Mercedes idling at the curb. Just Nola in a navy coat that looked new. Her hair pulled back simple instead of the styled perfection she'd worn at the reunion. She looked younger somehow, less burdened. The entry twist arrived quietly. 40 years of marriage to Walter had aged her, and without him, she finally looked free. But she'd come seeking forgiveness Harvey wouldn't give. "Harvey," she said, I I stood in the doorway. Didn't open it wider. Didn't close it. I just wanted to say. She paused, looked at her hands. I don't know what I wanted to say. The morning was cold, January frost still covering the grass. Her breath came out in small clouds. I saw the video, she continued. Everyone saw it. 3 million people. I waited. Walter's facing charges. The lawyer says he'll probably take a plea. 5 years, maybe 7. Still, I said nothing. I filed for divorce, moved to an apartment on 3rd Street. Small place, different. Her voice was steady, but not strong. Like she'd practiced this conversation, rehearsed the words, but they weren't landing the way she'd hoped. So I knew about the contract fraud, she said. Not at first, but later. By 2014, I knew. I should have said something. Should have stopped him. The admission hung between us. I came to apologize, Nola said. For the fraud, for the lies, for... She gestured vaguely. Everything. I said her name once. Nola. She looked up. I heard you. Now you need to go home. Her face changed. Not anger, not surprise. Just acceptance. She nodded without speaking and turned away from the door. Walked to her car, parked at the curb, a Honda sedan, not the Mercedes she'd driven for 20 years. The car started with a quiet hum. I stood in the doorway watching until her car disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door quietly. No satisfaction. No anger. Just the simple completion of a transaction that had ended the moment Walter tried to erase Emily's name from the scholarship fund she'd envisioned. Some apologies arrived too late to mean anything. Farah emerged from the kitchen, coffee cup in hand. Dad, who was that? Nola. What did she want? To apologize, I think. Farah looked at the closed door. Did you accept it? No. She nodded slowly, understanding. Good. What does forgiveness cost when it comes 40 years too late? More than Nola had to offer, more than I had to give. She came alone. That's the only thing that changed. 1 month after the reunion, I made my first public appearance as the acknowledged sponsor of the Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund. Hawthorne High School Auditorium. 200 people in attendance. Farah stood beside me on the small stage, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Garrett Thorne addressed the crowd from the podium. This scholarship represents more than financial assistance. It represents one man's dedication to education, to opportunity, to legacy. He gestured toward me. Mr. Harvey Fox, whose generosity over 9 years has made this fund possible. Applause filled the auditorium. Polite. Appreciative. I didn't need it, but I accepted it. Thorne called the recipients forward one by one. 8 students this year. 8 futures funded by 9 years of sacrifice. Maya Carlisle, 16 years old with her father's work-worn hands and her mother's careful hope, stood on stage holding the Emily Mercer Future Scholars Fund certificate like it might disappear if she let go. She wore a dress that had been hemmed recently. I could see the careful stitching at the bottom. Her shoes were practical, not fashionable. Her parents sat in the 3rd row holding hands, watching their daughter with expressions I recognized. Pride mixed with relief, mixed with gratitude. Thorne handed her the microphone. A few words, Maya. She looked at me, at Farah, at the certificate in her hands. Thank you, sir, she said. Her voice shook slightly. This changes everything for my family. Legacy is a bridge you build for strangers to cross. I'd slept without heating for 9 winters to save money for the scholarship fund. Driven the same truck for 15 years. Worked double shifts and weekend maintenance calls. Lived small so students like Maya could live larger. She didn't know any of that. Didn't know about the burns on my hands from saving Ethan. Didn't know about Walter's fraud or Nola's complicity. Didn't know about the reunion or the standing ovation or the 3 million people who'd watched my vindication online. She knew only that someone named Emily Mercer had believed in education and someone named Harvey Fox had funded that belief. The exit twist arrived in silence. The scholarship recipient didn't know Harvey's sacrifice behind her award, and Harvey realized that ignorance was exactly right. True legacy lives in opportunity given, not recognition received. That's exactly as it should be. Maya stepped down from the stage, certificate clutched in both hands, and walked back to her parents. They stood to embrace her. All three crying. Farah leaned close. Mom would be proud. I nodded. Emily had wanted this. Not the drama, not the revenge, not the exposure of Walter's theft. Just this. A working-class girl holding a certificate that represented 4 years of college, a future she couldn't have afforded, otherwise an opportunity built on sacrifice she'd never fully understand. The ceremony ended 30 minutes later. Parents shook my hand. Students thanked me. Teachers who'd known me for 40 years said they'd never known about the scholarship fund's true sponsor. I accepted their words without needing them. The girl held her certificate with both hands, smiling at her parents in the third row, completely unaware of the story behind the fund that would change her life. Farah squeezed my arm and whispered that Emily would be proud. I nodded, watching Maya Carlisle walk off the stage toward her future. That moment, watching Maya walk toward her future, certificate in hand, eyes bright with something she didn't yet have words for, was the proof I'd needed all along. Not proof of Walter's guilt. I'd had that for years. Proof that patience, real patience, the kind that costs you something every single morning, was worth every quiet year I'd spent building toward this night. But it had started differently. Long before the applause. Long before the cameras. On the night of the reunion itself, driving home through dark Texas roads with my daughter beside me, and 10 years of weight finally lifted from my chest. The old Ford's engine was the only sound for the first 10 miles. Farah sat in the passenger seat, her evening gown rustling softly when she shifted position. The country club's lights had already disappeared behind us, swallowed by the flat Texas dark, the way that place had swallowed so many things over the years, reputations, truths, a good woman's name carved off a wall like it had never belonged there. I didn't look back. I already knew what was gone. She'd been silent since we left. Since the applause faded. Since Walter walked out with police waiting. I let the silence sit. Comfortable. Earned. The kind of silence that only exists between two people who have been carrying the same weight from opposite ends without knowing it. 10 miles became 15. The highway stretched empty ahead, occasional streetlights marking distance like quiet sentinels. I drove and thought about the brown leather briefcase on the back seat, empty, now lighter than it had any right to be after everything it had held. The thing I least expected, Farah said finally, her voice breaking through the dark, the way a single light breaks through a long corridor. I waited. That you held on to all that evidence for 10 years and never told me. Her voice wasn't angry, just thoughtful, like someone trying to read a map they'd been holding upside down for years and only just realized it. Didn't want you growing up with that story weighing on you, I said. I grew up with it anyway. Just didn't know the ending until tonight. She looked out the window at passing darkness, at the flat fields rolling by like blank pages. You taught me something I never understood before. What's that? Patience isn't weakness. I kept my eyes on the road. No, it's not. I always thought you were just accepting things, being passive, letting Walter win. She paused, and I could hear her arranging the pieces in her mind, fitting them together the way you fit together, something that was always whole, but never visible. But you weren't accepting anything. You were building. Your mother's name needed to be there, I said. That's all. But that's not all, Dad. You funded 43 futures, saved a kid from a fire, exposed fraud, got justice after 9 years. Her voice caught at the end of that sentence, not from grief, but from the weight of realizing something too large to hold in a single breath. You did all that without hate. That's what I didn't understand. The Ford's heater hummed softly. Outside, Texas night stretched wide and dark and patient the way Texas always is, indifferent to human urgency, unbothered by the passage of time. Hate would have rushed it, I said. Rushed things break. She nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're writing something down, somewhere deeper than memory. We drove another 5 miles in silence. Not the silence of awkwardness or unfinished business, but the silence of two people who have said the most important thing and are letting it settle properly before saying anything else. At a red light nearing home, Farah shifted in her seat. Confession. I looked at her. I knew about the fund 2 years ago. The light stayed red. An empty intersection. No other cars. No sound, but the engine idling and the faint hum of the heater doing its quiet work. Principal Thorne called when you proposed Mom's name for it. Farah continued, her voice steady, unhurried, belonging to someone who had rehearsed this moment, and then decided rehearsal wasn't necessary after all. Asked if I approved. I said yes and asked him not to tell you I knew. The red light held us there, suspended in amber stillness. And you didn't tell me you knew. I learned patience from the best, she said. The light turned green. I drove forward. You're crying tonight. Was real, Farah said quickly, no hesitation in it. Knowing about it privately and seeing it on that screen in front of 600 people, that was different. Seeing the numbers, seeing your face when Walter tried to erase Mom's name. That made it real in a way I hadn't felt before. You can know something in your head for 2 years and still not know it in your chest until the right moment arrives. When does the student become the teacher? When she uses your own lessons better than you taught them. When she keeps secrets not from spite, but from strategy. When she understands that some truths need time to breathe before they can mean what they're supposed to mean. You didn't need to keep that from me, I said. Yes, I did. You needed to think I didn't know. Needed to protect me from it one more time. She smiled in the darkness, that quiet smile that belonged to Emily before it ever belonged to her. I let you. We pulled into the driveway at 20 past midnight. Farah kissed my cheek before heading to her bedroom light, as she always had since she was small. Love you, Dad. Love you too. I sat alone at the kitchen table where the story began. The brown leather briefcase sat open before me. Empty now, the way a room feels empty after the last guest has gone home, and you stand in the doorway knowing something real happened there. 10 years of meticulously gathered evidence, bank statements, emails, contract records, witness testimonies, medical reports, financial audits, all delivered to authorities during the reunion. Handed over to Principal Thorne, to the police, to Celeste Grant's cameras. Gone in one night. A decade reduced to a transaction, and yet it felt nothing like a loss. The briefcase had been full for so long. Heavy with paper, heavy with proof, heavy with purpose. I'd carried it to meetings, stored it in my truck's lockbox, kept it close during years when patience felt impossible, and the temptation to act too soon pressed against me like a hand on the chest. There were nights I sat at this same table and asked myself whether I was being patient or simply afraid. Whether I was building something or just convincing myself that waiting was the same as doing. Now it sat empty except for a single photograph. Emily on our wedding day. Young, smiling, unaware of the future, the daughter she'd raise, the vision she'd create, the name that would outlive her on a scholarship fund, sending strangers to college decades after she was gone. I touched the photograph's edge, carefully, the way you touch something that has survived longer than it had any right to. It's done, I said to the empty kitchen. To Emily's memory. To nobody. An empty briefcase weighs less than a full one, but means more. I stood and poured coffee. Same pot I'd used for 10 years. Same kitchen where I'd first opened Walter's contract fraud documents in 2012 and understood, sitting right here under this same yellow light, what needed to be built and how long it would take, and whether I had enough of the right kind of quiet inside me to see it through. I had wondered that for a long time. I knew the answer now. Through the window, the Texas sky began its slow shift, from black to navy to gray. Dawn assembling itself the way it always did out here, without drama, without announcement, simply arriving because it was time. Somewhere across Richardson, Walter sat in a holding cell or his attorney's office facing charges he couldn't deny, every carefully constructed lie, now dismantled in front of witnesses and cameras and the record. Nola sat in an apartment on 3rd Street, 40 years of marriage, dissolved into paperwork and silence. The viral video played on phones and laptops across the country, 3 million views, and climbing strangers watching a man's life fall apart in real time and calling it justice. But here in this kitchen, none of that mattered. Maya Carlisle held her scholarship certificate. Ethan Whitfield practiced medicine in a clinic he'd earned the right to work in. 43 students attended colleges they couldn't have afforded, otherwise living futures that existed because one woman had a vision and one man had refused to let that vision be buried. Emily's name lived on the way she had always deserved, not in whispers or in grief, but in forward motion. That was enough. More than enough. I closed the briefcase with the same soft click it made when I first opened it 10 years ago in this same kitchen. Carried it to the closet and set it on the top shelf beside Emily's old teaching materials and Farah's childhood drawings. Some things you keep not because you need them, but because they marked the journey, and the journey deserves to be marked. I returned to the kitchen table with my coffee. The street outside stayed quiet. No Mercedes driving past. No wave from Walter. Just Texas morning starting the way it always did. Slow, patient, inevitable, unbothered by what any single person had done or failed to do. I drank my coffee and watched the day begin. It tasted exactly the same as it always had. That was the thing about mornings. They didn't celebrate. They didn't mourn. They simply arrived, and you were either ready for them or you weren't. I was ready. And to you listening to my story, remember, this revenge isn't about hate. It's about patience. Looking back over those 9 years, I made mistakes. I could have confronted Walter in 2012, demanded immediate justice. But I would have lost. Don't make my mistake of thinking the fastest route is always right. Sometimes the slowest burn creates the most lasting light. I learned that patience isn't passive, it's the most active form of strategy. The lesson I want to pass down through these grandpa stories is simple truth. Doesn't need volume, just time. When someone steals from you credit, money, legacy, the immediate response is rage. But rage burns out fast and leaves nothing but ash. I believe God gave me those 9 years to build something permanent. Not just revenge, but restoration. Emily's scholarship fund now bears her name forever. 43 students got their education. Walter faces the justice he earned. That's what makes this family story worth telling, not the anger, but what the anger became when I gave it time to transform. If you've stayed with me this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between quick revenge and patient justice? Drop a comment below. Share this family story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more grandpa stories like this one, stories about dignity, patience, and getting it right, please subscribe to Dad's Revenge Stories. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. These grandpa stories are my way of passing down what I've learned. This particular family story includes some fictionalized details for storytelling purposes, but the core message about patience, dignity, and honoring the people we love, that part is real. God bless you.